Okay, hello again. Welcome. I'm going to talk about now. This program point is about the Gaiatone fingerboards, which is the fingerboard that I put on Magnus's bass. I've how many have I done now? Five. I think it's like five that I've put onto different basses now. Um, so I hope that I actually would like Kathy is here.
Um, so I think the first question is, why are we doing this?
Now it's working.
Um, as you, Great, perfect. Okay, so this is a map, as you can see, of deforestation that's taking place in the same areas that ebony is growing. And I should just clarify that one of the things we've been working on is trying to identify what exactly we are using for fingerboards. And what's become abundantly clear is that we don't really know. What we're calling ebony is really just the dense black core of a lot of different tropical tree species. And unfortunately, these are the same tree species that are in these magenta areas that are being heavily forested. So one by one, the tree species that we've been relying on for our fingerboards for the past couple hundred years are becoming threatened or endangered. So they're no longer really available. Um, I'll show you another. This is a project that's being done by a number of people, including Rémi Rouleau from the Quebec National Lutherie School, Boris Haag from Wilhelm Geigenbau, and a number of other national or international Lutherie schools. What we found was that what we consider to be ebony for our fingerboards actually is all these different tree species, and it varies tremendously in terms of hardness, density, stiffness, all the factors we rely on for a fingerboard. I'll show you one. And Rémi Rouleau from the Quebec School found this really interesting graphic, which shows a piece of ebony cut in the early 2000s. And this was what we were using as average grade ebony for our fingerboards then. Then, if you jump ahead to 2020, a AAA grade ebony fingerboard stock has large uneven pores, uneven coloration, and faint discoloration. So significantly different from what we were using as average grade ebony in 2000. And then the average grade ebony bought in 2020 is significantly inferior even to the AAA grade ebony. So let's look at why we're using ebony and why this is a problem for us. So the function of ebony is to strengthen the neck. So what Elinore was just referring to in having a bass where the pitch was actually changing was because the neck was not being stabilized by the ebony material that was on there. You're looking at a bunch of different factors going on: compressive strength, tensile strength, and shear strength, as well as bending strength in those necks when we apply the force from the strings. We need a really consistent, stiff, dense material to reinforce those necks so that we can stabilize the neck, preserve our pitch, and create a functional instrument. This is we're looking at load and deflection. So when we're looking at alternatives to ebony, we're looking at all these different factors to find a material that's going to enable us to stabilize that neck. That's our primary function for a fingerboard. Here's another picture of what's going on. You've got compression strength on the top, tension on the bottom. So we're looking for materials that are going to be high value in both of those directions. And then there's a bunch of other material that we're not going to go over here. But I'm going to jump down to what we're looking at with the ebony that we have available now. Specific gravity is also considered density or similar to density. Again, you can see the variety that we're looking at in the ebony that we're using for fingerboards now. Compressive strength, that's that top strength on the fingerboard that we're looking at. Again, a large variety, bending strength. And then hardness is another factor that's separate from density. And that's what we're looking at when we're looking at fingerboard dressing. So when you're pushing your fingers down on that fingerboard over and over again, this hardness is what determines how quickly those ruts or divots occur in your fingerboards. So let's jump down to some of the man-made alternatives that we're looking at. I'm just going to go to another chart here. So the three top candidates that we've come up with to as alternatives to ebony, are the Gaiatone, Sonowood, and Remprex, otherwise known as Ebonprex. You can see that they have different densities, all of which are significantly higher and more stable or consistent than the ebony. The compression strength, you can see, is all higher than your average ebony species on all of three of these alternatives. The modulus of elasticity, which is probably the least important, varies. I'd say Gaiatone is the weakest of those. Sonowood is the strongest, and Remprex or Ebonprex is a little bit above Gaiatone. The bending strength is important. That, again, is significantly higher in all three of these alternatives. And then sound velocity, usually used as a measure of stiffness, is all within the acceptable range for these alternatives. Again, Gaiatone is slightly lower, but that varies depending on the thickness of the material as well when you're talking about compressed paper materials. All right. So what are these materials? And what's available for bass makers? Sonowood is physically compressed wood. So they take spruce, maple, or beech, and they compress it with heat and pressure so that it has, as we saw, similar, if not stronger, characteristics to ebony. Gaiatone is compressed, recycled post-consumer paper with a resin that is non-petroleum and is as green as we can find on the market right now. Technically, we can't call it a bioresin, but it's one of its major components is actually cashew nut oil. And again, it's a non-petroleum-based resin, which is a plus when we're looking at climate change. The third, Ebonprex, is actually thin veneers of beech compressed and layered with a petroleum-based phenol resin. All three of these products have the advantage for makers in Europe as being FSC certified materials. The physical product, the fingerboards themselves, are not FSC certified yet. That's in process, but the material base that they're made from is FSC certified. So it's a much easier process for us to get that FSC certification for the fingerboards themselves. The major obstacle to using these materials has been their hardness. So Joseph Curtin just did an acoustical workshop looking at the abrasive qualities of these materials, which is linked to the hardness relative to ebony. And his conclusion in that workshop was that all of these materials are superior to ebony. And if we're looking at a material to replace ebony, all three of these would be an advantage. So there's no real need when we're looking at hardness, physical characteristics, to be going to ebony as a source. The the problem, the obstacle we run into over and over again with all three of them has been that the hardness is what, as Elinore referred to, dulls our plane blades and scrapers at an incredibly fast rate. So even though they are an advantage for the musicians once they've been put on the instruments, because we won't have to dress them as quickly, for luthiers putting them on, it's been an obstacle as to how to fit them and how to deal with these materials. So the team at our shop at Vermont Violins has been working really hard on coming up with those alternatives. And what we've come up with is a blade holder and a carbide steel insert, kind of like a razor blade, that can be attached to those blade holders that fit in the standard planes that we're using right now. So the Lie-Nielsen 60.5 and 102, 103, the old Stanley block plane, which is similar to the Lie-Nielsen 60.5. And then we're working on the Veritas and the new Stanley block planes, which are actually the same shape and model. The advantage to the carbide steel inserts is that they last for a very long time. We were testing them out on aluminum, and they would still keep working after we had tested it out on aluminum. I think we went through like 25 or 30 fingerboards of the Gaiatone, which is the hardest of those alternative materials, and the inserts were still working. They also work on hardwoods like maple, beech. They're less effective. They actually wear out more quickly on the softwoods like spruce, which was kind of a surprise to us. But they're easily changed out and they're relatively inexpensive. I think they're going to range from $12 to $20 for those inserts, depending on the shape and size of the plain blade that you're using. The other advantage to these alternative materials is that they're consistent. So unlike ebony, where we're dealing with a lot of variability and unpredictability, the ebony alternatives like the Gaiatone, Sonowood, and Ebonprex are manufactured materials. So they tend to be very similar from piece to piece to piece. Aesthetically, the big obstacle was black. I will say that Sonowood in any thicker sizes, and unfortunately bass falls into that category, we're not really able to provide Sonowood yet for the bass market, and I'm pretty pessimistic that we're going to be able to do that anytime soon within a reasonable price range. Ebonprex is available for bass at this point. Boris Hogg, Wilhelm Geigenbau is producing that. And I think they're saying it's like $650, $700 for a blank. It is not easy to produce it in large quantities because we're doing one piece at a time when we're cutting or milling Ebonprex. My other personal concern with Ebonprex is that it is a petroleum-based phenol resin, which means that with climate change and the goals of weaning ourselves off of petroleum-based products, we're kind of at odds with that long-term goal. But it is a viable option. Gaiatone is the least expensive black option on the market right now. We can do it in batches because it is a sheet product based for large-scale manufacturing. We can cut it or mill it more quickly and easily. The model that Elinore is using right now, which is most popular with the professional bass players, unfortunately, we have to layer two sheets together. So that's why we're kind of in that upper $400 price bracket. When we're doing it for the student level basses, we're down around $250, $350 for that material because we don't have to layer it.
So
Yeah.
One question I have is like, how adaptable is your production? If decided that I want to make a fingerboard with a different profile, that dimensions, how easy would that be for you to do?
So we do all of the CAD and the CAM in-house. So for those, CAD is computer assisted design. That's where you lay out the model and tell us what the scoop
Mm,
is,
mm,
uh, the shape, the height, all of those dimensions. And then we create that model in-house on a computer. Um, CAM is the computer assisted machining. That's where we tell the machine how to cut out that model. Um, so we do both of that in-house. So for us to, we have a base model that we work from for our CAD, and then we can change the scoop, change the height, adjust the radius along different profiles. We've been working with one of the larger Chinese base manufacturers to try and get them, wean them off of ebony and onto Gaiatone in this case, because it's the least expensive option. And it's a really good option for those guys in particular. And we're just constantly tweaking that model. So
mm.
as long as it's within reason, and we have a pretty broad range of what that reason is, um, we can do that machining and adjustments modeling in-house. Right now, the fingerboards that we're like that you're getting, Elinore, are designed to be kind of a fit and glue on product. So we're trying to reduce the amount of time that luthiers need to spend doing the fingerboard dressing and adjustment. Um, the plain blades are important because everybody likes to tweak things a little bit, but we'd like to be able to get you 80 to 90% of where you want to be so that you're saving time and actually making money putting new fingerboards on bases.
You mentioned, yeah, just jumping in with another question immediately. You mentioned that there might be a tailpiece in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Arnold Schnitzer gave us a tailpiece model to do for bases. So we have that model. Um, we're working with Zachary Martin on a really specific model that he was doing too. Um, so I'm not sure where he is in that process at this point. We had done several prototypes for him and they looked beautiful. So I'm really hoping that he is able to finish up that part of the process. Um, it's fun making tailpieces. We're making Baroque tailpieces for another maker who's going to be at Mondo Musica. We have tailpieces for violin and viola, all different shapes and models. So we're kind of hoping that people come up with some really unique or fun tailpiece models that they would love to see on the market so that we can kind of expand on what's out there and what's available as well.
One thing that I as a maker I really I'm looking for is the dimensions, because when you're trying to buy a tailpiece online, they just say, oh, it's 3/4, oh, it's 4/4, it's like it's full size, and it doesn't tell you anything about the dimensions. And bases, they vary very quite a lot, and sometimes you need a longer one, sometimes you need a shorter one. So if you can produce, yeah, and custom, yeah, and then the answer to that, oh, you just have to do a custom one to so that you know that it fits that base. And we just made a custom one for Magnus's base at what, walnut, yeah. But yeah, so it's fun. But yes, tail pieces are fun. I yeah.
They are, and okay, so here's the other fun thing. When you're doing CAD, if you have a base model that you're working from, you can actually expand and contract
Yeah.
that model.
Hmm.
So when we're doing a milling run, we can do for people like if a shop says, "Hey, I would like to have a selection of different sizes for my shop," we can do a run where we actually cut out a selection of different lengths
That's
that people say, okay, this would be really helpful. So, and to make it even more fun, so the Gaiatone comes in a lot of different colors. I think it was Pauline Cutlarts wanted like a brown tail fingerboard for her bass. And it was a really beautiful, like brown and cream. So it looks like you have grain lines in brown and cream.
Oh.
And you can actually get really crazy and you can do like blue and cream or red and cream or, gold and cream. There's different options. So yeah, I will say there's a lot of wonderful things that we can do and a lot of different opportunities we have with materials like Gaiatone out there for the marketplace. And young people in particular love having those choices.
Mm.
So just heads up on that.
Well, let's get the young people playing on bases that are affordably produced, um, in
Yeah.
yeah, in such numbers that it makes it economically viable. And I think that's getting that's going is what's going to make the big change, because it's not fun to go to see your biggest instrument supplier and you look through all the different bases instruments that are available, which all have ebony fingerboards.
Yeah. Yeah.
There needs to be this like switch in conscious, yeah, in mentality.
Yeah. I mean, there are two pieces of two changes in the legal atmosphere that are affecting us that we're rapidly going to have to shift to address. One for the United States is the Lacey Act, which requires that any import over $2,500 that's a wooden product, we have to list the species, the country of origin, um, and we're responsible. It's a strict liability law for knowing that that wood was legally harvested. Um, Martin Guitars was fined $350,000 in 2013 for importing ebony that they had paperwork saying it was legal. But when you went back through and investigated that paperwork, it was discovered that that wood was actually illegally harvested. The other thing for you as makers and shops in Europe is European Union deforestation regulation, which goes beyond showing that you have legal sources of wood to being able to establish that you have a sustainable supply chain of wood. So that's not just that it's cut legally, but that it is sustainably being harvested. And again, there is nobody out there who is going to say that we have a sustainable source for ebony right now. We could establish a sustainable source of ebony in some place like Madagascar, but it would probably be 80 to 100 years before we were able to really harvest that sustainably. It's fun. Like one thing you had mentioned, Elinore, was
Mhm.
that you're going to play the bass with the Gaiatone fingerboard. Um, we did, and in the US, we had what's called the Coke Challenge, where people could, decide if they were drinking Coke or Pepsi. Or I guess it was called the Pepsi Challenge. So we did something similar with a Gaiatone cello and an ebony fingerboard cello at a summer camp that was geared toward conservatory students 2 summers ago. Um, but the students couldn't tell the difference.
Mm.
And they were really surprised when we would tell them, okay, that was Gaiatone and that was ebony. They're like, oh, it looks and feels the same. And they had no concerns about the playability, the sound. It didn't make any difference.
Oh, another thing that I thought about, do a lot of Endpins.
Yeah.
It's like a very common thing, especially like school bases and all bases. They the end pins don't work, and they made the you can only, like the brand that I buy. It's you can choose between palisander, rosewood, and ebony. Wouldn't it
Yeah.
be great if we had a third option there?
Yeah. There's a company over here in Boston called TechPin that we were talking to about this as well. Um, it can be done.
Mm.
It would be fun to do. We just again need ideas and breaking into some of those larger markets where you're talking about the manufacturing with the Endpins. If it's a small company that's kind of doing one or two models and smaller numbers, they're usually easier to convert over to alternative materials than the larger suppliers where they've got stocks already piled up. Um, they it means changing over their production line.
Mm.
And that just opens up a whole bunch, a lot of different questions that take longer for them to process.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
it's been interesting working with this one bass manufacturer because the things we thought were easy solutions, it turned out their problems had more to do with other parts of the process in their manufacturing, like the inconsistency of the widths of the necks or the inconsistency of the neck sets. And so, yeah, it's been a much longer process than we thought it would be originally. But I would love to work with the Endpin producers.
Uh, is there a question to you
Yeah,
both? Yeah, how would it work to make an extension with Gaiatone? If all the measurements is done in the computer, would it be possible to adjust the pieces beforehand? This was also like I've been thinking about, yeah, but I think it would need to have a 3D scan um,
yeah. Well,
of the fingerboard, and that to get and then you could get it perfect.
yes. I mean, if
I mean, of the
so,
scroll.
two things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, if you have the dimensions, we can make it for you.
Mm.
Uh, the other thing that we did do, and yes, Gaiatone would make a great extension material. Um, the other person we just worked with was Seth Kimmel, who had a Gaiatone fingerboard and then bought Sonowood to make the extension with. And that worked as well. So you have options. You can go either way, and we can mill both materials. Um, or Sonowood is a little easier to work with these alternative
Mm.
planes.
Mm.
Both of them should be a lot easier to work with these alternative planes if you have to do fine adjustments for those extensions, because like you said, of the scroll. Um, both of these materials will also work with jigsaws. It's just going to be hard on that jigsaw blade. So you'll probably have to change
Yep.
out the jigsaw
Yeah.
blade.
We know.
Upfront about that because we have to change them out all the time. So
Thank you very, very much. I think we've got to
thank you. Have a great day.
thank you.